Hi guys, close your eyes for a second. Imagine a world before pyramids, before Rome, before kings and knights and castles. A time when humanity was just waking up, when the very idea of a city, a law, a story, or even a written word didn't exist. And yet, out of the dust of endless deserts and the slow breath of ancient rivers, a people emerged who changed everything. They were called the Sumerians. You may never have heard their names, but every word you read, every coin you spend, every clock that ticks on your wall carries their fingerprints. They were the first builders of civilization, the inventors of writing, the brewers of beer, the makers of myth. But who were they really? What was life like in their mysterious world of gods, clay, and copper? Tonight, we step into the oldest story ever told, and I promise, it's not just history, it's a portal. So, dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let's drift back 5,000 years to the land between the rivers, ancient Mesopotamia. The air is thick with heat and dust. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates wind through the land like silver veins, their waters glistening under a copper sun. Along their banks, reed huts rise, smoke curls from clay ovens, and the distant hum of life fills the air. Here, on this fertile floodplain, the first cities are being born. Uruk, your Lagash Nipper. Eridu, strange names, but they pulse with life. People in woven tunics carry baskets of barley, craftsmen hammer bronze, and farmers sing songs to the water gods. The Sumerians were not conquerors, they were creators. They took mud and made bricks. They took chaos and made order. They looked at the wild floodwaters that once destroyed their crops and said, "No more." They built canals, dikes, and irrigation systems so precise that even today, engineers marvel at their genius. Their fields bloomed with wheat and barley. Their animals multiplied. Their people thrived. And as villages grew into towns and towns into cities, something extraordinary happened. The world's first civilization was born. But civilization is more than bricks and barley. It's the moment humans begin to imagine something larger than survival. In the bustling streets of Uruk, we see that awakening. Merchants trade goods, children chase goats, and in the temple, the ziggurat, a massive mountain of sun-baked bricks, priests climb the steps to speak with the gods. Their gods are everywhere: Anu, the sky, Enlil, the wind, Inanna, the goddess of love and war. To the Sumerians, the divine world isn't somewhere distant. It's woven into every breath, every sunrise, every drop of rain. And to speak with the gods, they needed a way to remember, to record, to give permanence to their prayers and their promises. That's when it happened, one of humanity's greatest inventions. A scribe, sitting in the flickering torchlight, presses a reed into wet clay, wedge by wedge, line by line, and creates the world's first written language, cuneiform. With that single act, history began. The Sumerians didn't just write, they documented everything. Grain rations, temple offerings, trade agreements, even songs and myths. These clay tablets, thousands of them, became the memory of civilization itself. And through their words, we can still hear their voices. A young farmer writes about the floods. A merchant tallies his debts. A priest records a dream. A poet, yes, the world's first poet, sings about love, heartbreak, and longing. That poet's name, Enheduanna, the daughter of King Sargon of Akkad. She lived around 2300 BCE and wrote hymns so beautiful that scholars still call her the first author in history. Can you imagine? The very first human to write about her soul, her pain, her god, was a woman. She writes, Inanna, queen of all powers, radiant light, your heart is great, may it bless the faithful. Her words shimmer like starlight through 5,000 years of dust. But not all was peace and poetry in Sumer. Civilization has a price. As cities grew, so did greed and war. The kings of Lagash and Umma fought over water rights. Armies marched with copper spears, and the first recorded battles were etched into stone. The Sumerians invented not only writing, but also law, and its darker twin, warfare. In the city of Ur, the great ziggurat towered a sacred mountain where heaven and earth met. Priests ruled from above, commanding thousands of workers and slaves. The temple owned land, crops, and laborers. Religion, politics, and economy were one. And in this order, one truth was clear: the gods gave power, and the kings held it in their name. Each ruler called himself the shepherd of the people, chosen by the gods to bring balance. But when the floods failed, when famine came, when enemies closed in, the people cried out, "Have the gods abandoned us?" Because in Sumer, the line between divine and human was thin as a thread. At night, the desert wind howled outside the city walls. The stars stretched across the sky like an endless map, and the Sumerians looked up and wondered what lies beyond. They were the first astronomers. They tracked the movements of planets, charted the stars, and measured time itself. Their calendar divided the year into months. Their math used a base-60 system. That's why we have 60 seconds in a minute, 360 degrees in a circle. Every clock, every compass, every equation whispers their legacy. Let's step closer now into the heart of a Sumerian feast. The tables are laid with barley bread, dates, onions, lamb roasted in honey. There is beer, thick, cloudy, and strong, poured from large clay jars. They drink it through straws, laughing, singing hymns to the goddess Ninkasi, the patron of brewing. Yes, even beer was sacred. And that's where we see their secret. The Sumerians didn't just invent civilization, they invented culture. They believed in beauty, in joy, in ritual. Their art shows lovers embracing, musicians playing harps, dancers spinning beneath the moon. For them, life was a gift to be celebrated, not endured, but time, even for gods and kings, always turns. As the centuries passed, the Sumerian cities began to weaken. The rivers shifted, the soil grew salty, and rival peoples rose in power. The Akkadians came, then the Babylonians, each building on Sumer's foundations, each rewriting its story. By 2000 BCE, the great cities of Sumer fell silent. The ziggurats crumbled, the temples turned to dust, and the language of the gods cuneiform slowly faded. Yet the echo remained. Because the Sumerians had done something no one before them dared. They took chaos and turned it into civilization. They turned mud into meaning. If you walk the ruins of Uruk today, you can still see the bricks they made, pressed with fingerprints that once belonged to living hands. You can stand in the desert wind and feel it, the heartbeat of the world's first cities. And maybe, just maybe, if you listen closely, you'll hear a whisper through time. We were the first. They were the first to build, to write, to dream. The first to ask who we are and what it means to be human. As the last torches burn low, the story of Sumer fades like dawn over the river. But their legacy, the written word, the wheel, the city, the law, lives in every one of us. We are their children, walking through their dream. The city of Uruk sleeps under the velvet night, its streets bathed in the dim glow of oil lamps. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of clay, grain, and human breath. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, and a priest chants to Inanna, the Queen of Heaven. The hum of life, even at rest, vibrates through the mud-brick walls. In a small courtyard near the temple, a potter works late. His hands, calloused and strong, shape the wet clay into bowls, jugs, and jars. He doesn't know it, but his work will survive millennia. Buried beneath layers of sand, the fingerprints of an ordinary man outlasting empires. The Sumerians believed that creation was an act of divine imitation. The gods made them from clay, so they made their world from it in return. Every vessel, every wall, every brick, a reflection of divine craftsmanship. To live in Sumer was to live between worlds. The mortal and the divine were forever entwined. Each day began with rituals. The first light of dawn belonged to the gods. Priests burned incense, poured libations, and recited hymns that echoed from the ziggurats down to the marketplace. The people bowed, whispered their prayers, and went on with their work. In Yor, the baker kneads barley flour mixed with honey. In Lagash, the herder counts his sheep at the city gates. In Nippur, the priest prepares offerings of dates and milk. Civilization was not just about progress, it was about rhythm, the rhythm of the sun, the flood, the harvest, and the will of the gods. They believed their gods lived in everything. When the wind howled, it was Enlil speaking. When the river overflowed, it was Enki's hand guiding life and destruction alike. But the gods were not gentle. They demanded devotion, sacrifice, and obedience. And so, at the heart of every city, rose the ziggurat, a colossal stairway between heaven and earth. Imagine it, a massive structure of tiered bricks, painted in shades of blue and gold, rising above the flat horizon like a man-made mountain. The priests climbed its winding staircases daily, carrying baskets of offerings, their chants merging with the sound of flutes and drums. From its summit, one could see all of Sumer, the canals like silver threads, the fields shimmering in the morning sun, and the people moving like ants, tiny and eternal. To rule in such a world was to carry the burden of both man and God. The kings of Sumer were no ordinary rulers. They claimed descent from the divine. Their power was not earned, it was given. The Sumerians believed that kingship descended from heaven. A sacred flame passed from one city to another. Their earliest kings, recorded in the Sumerian king list, ruled for hundreds of years, or so the legends say. Ululim of Eridu, who reigned for 28,800 years, a longer 36,000 years. These were not mortal lifespans, but mythic ones, echoes of a world before history began. Yet beneath the myth was something real. Kings like Gilgamesh, yes, that Gilgamesh walked their dusty streets. Half man, half god, he was the warrior king of Uruk, restless, proud, and searching for immortality. His story, etched into clay, became the world's first epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh. In it, we find not only the tale of a hero, but the mirror of humanity itself. Gilgamesh, powerful yet haunted, defies death, seeking the secret of eternal life. He befriends Enkidu, a wild man from the steppe, created by the gods to humble him. Together they battle monsters, anger gods, and journey beyond the world of men. But when Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh weeps. For the first time, a human voice cries out against mortality. He says, "Shall I not die too? Am I not like Enkidu? Grief has entered my heart." And so begins humanity's oldest question. How do we live, knowing we will die? Through Gilgamesh, we see the soul of the Sumerians, brilliant, flawed, divine, and mortal, all at once. Beyond their myths, their daily life pulsed with purpose. The marketplace was the heartbeat of every city. Traders from distant lands brought copper from Oman, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and cedar wood from Lebanon. They bartered for wool, oil, and grain, their voices rising like waves against the hum of the crowd. Sumer was the world's first global economy. To keep track of it all, they developed tablets, tokens, seals, and ledgers, the birth of bureaucracy. Every sack of barley, every jug of oil, every sheep had to be recorded. Accountability became sacred, and with it came the concept of law. The Sumerians were the first to put justice into writing. Long before Hammurabi, kings like Yarnamu of your inscribed legal codes on clay, "If a man commits murder, he shall be killed," one line reads. "If he steals, he shall repay tenfold." Justice, for the first time, had form. In homes of mud brick and reeds, families gathered for meals. Women baked bread, brewed beer, wove cloth, and managed the household. Contrary to what many believe, Sumerian women had rights. They could own property, run businesses, and even become priestesses. Their children learned not from scrolls, but from clay. Tiny hands pressed styluses into tablets, repeating signs again and again, until the language became second nature. The scribes were the elite keepers of knowledge, guardians of civilization. Every stroke they made was an act of preservation. In the evenings, music filled the streets. Lyres, drums, and flutes echoed through courtyards as neighbors gathered to tell stories. The people of Sumer were not just farmers and builders, they were dreamers. Their songs spoke of harvests, of love, of the fickle moods of gods. One ancient hymn praises the beer goddess Ninkasi, teaching the recipe through verse. "You are the one who bakes the bapir in the big oven, pours the mash and the sweet wort into the great vat." It's not just poetry, it's the world's first brewing manual. Even in joy, the Sumerians saw divinity. To eat, drink, love, and create was to participate in the work of the gods. But the wheel of time turns, and peace never lasts. As the centuries passed, drought and war gnawed at Sumer's strength. Rival cities turned against each other. Irrigation systems failed, salinity poisoned the soil, and famine stalked the fields. The gods, they said, had grown silent. A great flood came, a story so powerful it survived across cultures, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Bible's Noah. In the tablet Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah tells how the gods decided to cleanse the earth of mankind. He built a vast boat, sealed with pitch, filled it with animals and seed, and waited as the storm raged for 6 days and 7 nights. When the waters receded, he released a dove. Sound familiar? From Sumer came not just writing, but myth, the blueprint of humanity's imagination. By 2000 BCE, the torch of civilization passed from Sumer to Akkad, from Akkad to Babylon. The cities of Uruk and Urartu were abandoned. The once mighty canals dried into scars across the earth. Yet, even as their world crumbled, the Sumerians refused to vanish. Their language lived on as the script of scholars and priests. Their gods were adopted and renamed by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Inanna became Ishtar, Enki became Ea. Their myths became the bones of all later religions, and in that sense they achieved immortality. Imagine standing now among their ruins. The sun sets over what was once your the ziggurats bricks glowing with the last light. The air smells of sand and history. Beneath your feet lie thousands of tablets, each one a whisper from a forgotten world. If you pick one up and trace the marks, you can almost feel it, the pulse of the first human thought preserved in clay. A man writing his debt, a woman composing a hymn, a king declaring victory, a child learning to spell his name. This was where we began. Before Greece, before Egypt, before Rome, there was Sumer. They gave us cities, writing, math, time, laws, art, music, and the eternal desire to reach for the divine. They taught us how to dream, and though their temples have fallen, their rivers changed course, and their gods faded into myth, their spirit endures in every story told, in every symbol carved, in every line written, because civilization didn't start with a sword. It started with a reed pressed into clay. As night folds over the desert once more, imagine a flicker of torchlight, a lone scribe, his face lit by flame, bending over a tablet. He writes not for himself, but for those yet to come. For us, he presses each sign carefully, whispers a prayer to Nabu, the god of wisdom, and smiles. He knows that his words will outlive him. And as the clay hardens, history takes its first breath again. The torch passes, unseen, through time, from Sumer to Babylon, to Greece, to Rome, to us. And somewhere, deep in that unbroken chain of thought and creation, the voice of the first civilization still murmurs through the ages. The dawn rises over the plains of Mesopotamia. The rivers glimmer like mirrors of gold beneath the newborn light, their currents carrying both life and memory. The cities of Sumer are older now, worn but alive. The hum of humanity never stops. In the courtyards of yore, the baker lights his oven. In Lagash, a scribe unrolls a damp clay tablet, reading yesterday's flood report. The people still rise to work, still pray to their gods, still dream of immortality. But something is shifting. The wind carries whispers of change, the kind that bends the course of history itself. The Sumerians, once rulers of the known world, now find themselves surrounded by new powers. The Akkadians, Semitic-speaking people from the northern plains. Trade has brought them wealth, contact, and danger. Through trade routes and warfare, the borders between tribes blur, languages mix, and from the fertile chaos, a new kind of world begins to form. The city of ACD grows under the reign of a man named Sargon. His story is legend, written in clay and memory. Born an orphan, found floating in a basket on a river. Raised by a gardener, Sargon rose to become a cupbearer in the court of Kish, and then, through cunning and courage, seized power. He conquered Sumer's proudest cities, uniting them under his rule. And in doing so, he created something entirely new, the world's first empire. From the waters of the Persian Gulf to the mountains of Anatolia, Sargon's banners flew. The old Sumerian gods were still worshipped, but the language of the land began to shift. Akkadian replaced Sumerian in the mouths of merchants and soldiers, though the scribes continued to write in the old tongue. For centuries, Sumerian would live on a sacred language, like Latin in later times, reserved for priests and scholars. But though the names changed, the soul of Sumer remained. In the temples of Nippur, the hymns of Enheduanna, Sargon's daughter, echoed through the marble halls. She wrote not for power, but for connection, to bridge heaven and earth. Her poems to Inanna weren't just devotion, they were philosophy, an attempt to understand the human heart. Through her, the Sumerians spoke one last time to eternity. Queen of heaven, your light shines over all lands. Where you cast your glance, life and death are decided. Those words were pressed into clay almost 5,000 years ago, yet they still hum with feeling, proof that emotion, art, and longing are as old as civilization itself. With the Akkadian Empire came progress, but also turmoil. The gods of Sumer had always demanded balance, and now the scales began to tip. Drought gripped the land. The rivers that once gave life turned to threads of salt and sand. Crops withered, animals died, and the great canal systems, once miracles of engineering, fell into decay. The people cried out, building temples higher, offering more sacrifices, but the gods stayed silent. When the Akkadian Empire finally collapsed around 2150 BCE, it wasn't by sword, but by nature. The earth itself rebelled. The fertile lands of Sumer turned barren. Entire cities were abandoned, not destroyed, just left, as if the people woke up one morning, packed their things, and walked away from history. For almost a century, the land fell into shadow. The Sumerian dream, once a blaze of light, flickered low, but not out. From the ashes, a new power rose, Yor III, the third dynasty of Yor. It was a return to tradition, a Sumerian renaissance. Under the reign of King Yor-Namu, the old ways were revived, the canals repaired, the temples rebuilt, law and order returned. The king, perhaps remembering the chaos of collapse, created something remarkable, the Yor-Namu Code, one of the earliest known law codes in human history. It was simple, direct, and surprisingly humane. If a man breaks another's bone, he shall pay in silver. If a man's ox gores another man's, he shall compensate him. Justice, measured not in vengeance, but in fairness, a radical idea for its time. Yor-Namu's rule brought peace and prosperity, but like all golden ages, it was brief. His successors faced invasions, rebellions, and the growing power of new people from the east, the Elamites, the Amorites, and beyond them, the Babylonians. Yet even as the Sumerians faded politically, their spirit bled into every culture that followed. The Akkadians took their writing, the Babylonians took their laws, the Assyrians took their gods, the Greeks, thousands of years later, would inherit their myths disguised in new names. The world moved on, but Sumer lived in its veins. Let's step back for a moment into the ordinary life of a Sumerian citizen just before the fall. He wakes at dawn, washes his hands in a clay basin, and bows to the household gods, small figurines of protective spirits made of bronze and terracotta. His wife grinds barley, humming softly. Children chase each other through the narrow alleys, their laughter echoing against the walls. At the temple, the priests are already at work, measuring offerings, counting livestock, tallying the harvest. Each act of devotion is also an act of record. The scribes sit cross-legged on mats, styluses tapping rhythmically against the soft clay, the first bureaucratic heartbeat of civilization. The worker heads to the fields, his tools simple but effective. The plow is drawn by oxen. The soil, rich and dark, smells of promise. He knows the flood cycles by memory, the rhythm of water and sun that defines his life. At midday, he returns home, drinks a bowl of thick beer, eats bread, dates, and salted fish. Life is hard, but it is ordered. It makes sense. He doesn't know that beyond the horizon, new empires are forming. That one day, his language will vanish, his gods forgotten, his city swallowed by sand. To him, Sumer will last forever. And perhaps, in some way, it has. Every part of our modern world carries the ghost of Sumerian invention. When we write, we echo the first wedge pressed into clay. When we measure time, we follow their basics system. When we build cities, divide labor, establish law, we walk in their footsteps. They even gave us the concept of kingship, divine rule, and civic duty, ideas that would shape politics for millennia. And then there are their stories. The Epic of Gilgamesh survived long after Sumer fell. It was copied, translated, and retold across ages. When archaeologists uncovered its tablets in the 19th century, the world gasped, a 4,000-year-old story about mortality, friendship, and loss. In it, Gilgamesh's search for immortality ends not with success, but with wisdom. He realizes that to live forever is impossible, but to build, to love, to leave something behind, that is how humans defy death. And so he returns to Uruk, stands atop its walls, and sees the city stretching before him, proof that humans can create something lasting. That ending, born in Sumer, still defines us. As centuries pass, the land changes hands. The Elamites sack Ur, the Amorites found Babylon, and Sumer becomes a whisper. But deep below the surface, buried under layers of silt, their legacy sleeps, waiting to be found again. Thousands of years later, explorers and archaeologists will dig into the earth of Mesopotamia and uncover what was once thought lost forever. Tablets upon tablets, each filled with the marks of ancient minds. When they were first translated, the modern world could hardly believe it. These ancient people were not primitive at all. They were engineers, mathematicians, poets, scientists. The first schools were theirs, the first maps, theirs, the first contracts, hymns, prayers, even jokes, theirs. The oldest known riddle in the world is Sumerian, something which has never occurred since time immemorial. A young woman did not fart in her husband's lap. Humor, too, began in Sumer. Even death was not the end. The Sumerians believed in an afterlife, a dark, dusty underworld called Kur. When a person died, their spirit traveled there, living on as a shadow, eating clay, drinking stale water. It wasn't paradise, it was survival. But in their view, this shadow life was not punishment. It was simply the continuation of existence, neither good nor bad, just eternal. To live forever in memory was the truest immortality. And they achieved that. When night falls again over the plains of Mesopotamia, the stars shimmer above the ruins of Ur and Eridu. The wind moves through the reeds, whispering through the broken bricks, carrying voices older than time. If you listen, you can almost hear them, the clatter of tools, the chants to Enlil, the laughter of children by the river. The world they built may be gone, but the story they began never ended. Civilization didn't just appear, it was imagined, one dream at a time, by people who dared to believe that humanity could be more than survival. They were the first to name the stars, to track the seasons, to look at mud and see eternity. They were the first to say, "Let's build something that lasts," and they did. Their fingerprints are on every word we write, every law we follow, every dream we chase. They built the stage upon which all of human history would play. So when you walk through a modern city, surrounded by towers of glass and steel, remember, it all began here, with them, the Sumerians, the people who started civilization. The last embers of the Sumerian world glowed faintly beneath the soil of Mesopotamia. The mighty ziggurats that once touched the heavens now stood half-buried in the dust, their baked bricks cracked and scorched by time. The canals that once shimmered with the lifeblood of civilization had become scars of dry earth, overgrown with reeds, whispering in the hot wind. Yet in that silence, the story of Sumer did not end. It began to transform, because when an idea is powerful enough, when it's born of blood, belief, and brilliance, it doesn't die, it evolves. The Sumerians had taught the world how to live together, how to write, how to govern, how to dream. And though their cities fell, their ideas drifted north, carried by traders, scholars, and conquerors. Every new kingdom that rose on Mesopotamian soil unknowingly carried Sumer's flame. When the Amorites came, they built Babylon atop the ruins of Sumer. They spoke a new language, prayed to the same gods under new names, and walked streets paved with ancient Sumerian bricks. When Hammurabi, the great lawgiver of Babylon, carved his famous code, he was echoing Ur-Nammu, the Sumerian king who first dared to write justice into clay. If a man blinds another, let him be blinded in return. The principle of retribution, the idea that law could be universal, not arbitrary. That was Sumer's legacy, refined and reborn. In Hammurabi's time, scribes still studied the old tablets. In dusty temple archives, they copied hymns to Inanna, epics of Gilgamesh, and lists of Sumerian kings. The ancient tongue had become the Latin of the Near East, the sacred language of scholars and priests. In the schools of Babylon, students were still taught to draw the wedge-shaped signs of cuneiform, the world's first writing system, invented over 1,000 years before. They memorized thousands of symbols, their styluses pressing into soft clay until their fingers bled. It was not just writing, it was initiation into civilization itself. Each tablet they created was a whisper from the past, a connection to the Sumerian scribes who had once recorded the same signs beneath oil lamps in Uruk and Nippur. The continuity was astonishing. The Sumerians may have vanished, but their mind, their way of thinking, had become immortal. Generations passed. Babylon rose, fell, and rose again. Empires shifted like sand dunes, yet still the pattern of Sumer endured. Every civilization that followed inherited something from them. The Assyrians took their cities and turned them into fortresses of iron and war, carving their triumphs into stone reliefs, but their writing, their gods, their bureaucracy, all had Sumerian blood. The Persians, centuries later, inherited the dream of order, the empire that ruled by law, not chaos. Their royal scribes still used cuneiform to inscribe decrees. Their gods walked under different names, but their temples, calendars, and rituals all traced back to the river valleys of Sumer, and further west, across deserts and mountains. Even the Egyptians looked eastward and borrowed ideas, the concept of kingship, the divine ruler who bridges heaven and earth, the very idea that a city could mirror the cosmos, that architecture could represent divine order, that to began in Sumer. The ziggurat was the world's first mountain built by man, a step between heaven and earth. When the Egyptians raised their pyramids, they followed that ancient pattern, transforming baked mud into limestone perfection. From the mud brick ziggurats of yore to the golden peaks of Giza, the line of thought was clear. Humanity was learning how to touch the divine. But perhaps the most profound inheritance was invisible, the Sumerian worldview. They were the first to see the universe as an organized system, governed by laws both divine and natural. To them, gods weren't just symbols, they were principles of reality, forces that explained everything from floods to fertility. When Enlil blew the wind, crops grew. When Inanna wept, the rivers swelled. It wasn't science yet, but it was the beginning of it. Because in their attempt to understand divine order, they discovered patterns. They measured stars, tracked time, and noticed the rhythms of the heavens. The Sumerians divided the day into 12 double hours, the hour into 60 minutes, the circle into 360 degrees, numbers we still use today, over 5 millennia later. Every clock, every compass, every degree of latitude, all of it is Sumerian mathematics, living quietly in our modern world. Even the calendar you follow traces its ancestry to their celestial observations. They watched Venus rise and fall, recording its cycle with precision that still stuns astronomers. They were not just farmers and builders, they were scientists in sandals. But for all their brilliance, the Sumerians never claimed perfection. Their myths reflect human fragility, not divine certainty. Take Enki, the trickster god of wisdom, who created humans from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god. Humanity was made not in glory, but in compromise, to do the work the gods no longer wished to do. In Sumerian eyes, life was both a gift and a burden. Work, struggle, and faith were the price of existence. But they also believed that through knowledge, through art, humans could approach the divine. That balance between toil and transcendence, between survival and beauty, became the foundation of all civilization after them. When the Greeks spoke of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, they were echoing Enki's wisdom. When the Hebrews wrote of Adam molded from dust, they were retelling the Sumerian creation myth. When Gilgamesh sought immortality, he was asking the same question every human still asks: what does it mean to live forever? The rediscovery of Sumer in modern times is itself a story of resurrection. For thousands of years, their cities lay buried under mounds of earth. The Bible mentioned places like Ur and Babel, but few believed they were real. The desert swallowed them whole. Then, in the 19th century, explorers and archaeologists began to dig. At first, they thought they had found Babylonian ruins, but deeper they went, and older the layers became older than Babylon, older than Akkad. They found tablets written in a language no one could read, filled with strange wedge-shaped marks. It took decades to decode them. When scholars finally realized they had uncovered a civilization that predated all known empires, one that had invented writing, law, and organized religion, the world was stunned. Sumer had been the missing first chapter of human history. Suddenly, history itself had to be rewritten. The people who had lived, loved, and prayed on those plains were not myth. They were us, 5,000 years removed, but still recognizably human. Their tablets spoke of taxes and floods, of broken hearts and beer recipes, of schoolboys punished for laziness, of kings boasting of glory, and of gods who could be merciful or cruel. It was all there, the entire emotional spectrum of human life pressed into clay. Today, as you scroll through a screen made of glass and metal, remember that the Sumerians were the first to record information in a durable form. They understood what it meant to preserve thought. Their medium was clay, ours is code, but the impulse is the same, to make memory permanent. And in that sense, we are still Sumerian. The way we write, count, rule, worship, build, and dream all flow from the same river. Civilization didn't emerge by chance. It was invented, refined, and passed down like a torch. Every library, every classroom, every government office, every architect's drawing board, they are all echoes of the first cities between the Tigris and Euphrates. Let's imagine, for a moment, walking through one of those cities at its height. The sun sets over Uruk, painting the ziggurat in crimson light. The marketplace hums with life traders, shouting in Akkadian and Sumerian, camels loaded with lapis lazuli, gold and grain. Children chase stray dogs through the alleys. The smell of roasted onions, dates, and beer fills the air. In the temple, a priestess of Inanna stands before a statue of the goddess, pouring libations of sweet wine. Her chant rises and falls like a heartbeat. The room is lit by oil lamps, their flames flickering against walls carved with prayers. Outside, the astronomers climb to the top of the ziggurat. They lay down tablets, trace the stars, and mark the time. Their calculations will one day form the basis of every calendar and clock we use. Nearby, in a small schoolhouse, a young scribe practices his signs. He doesn't know it, but what he writes will outlive him by thousands of years. And somewhere in that city, perhaps in a quiet courtyard, an old man looks up at the night sky, the same stars you see now, and wonders if anyone will remember his people. They will, because centuries later, their language will whisper through Akkadian, then through Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Their myths will resurface in Genesis and Homer. Their laws will shape the foundations of justice. Their architecture will inspire the towers of Babylon, the temples of Egypt, and even the skyscrapers of the modern age. Every human society that builds, records, and believes, every culture that measures time or seeks meaning is in some way descended from Sumer, and perhaps that is the truest immortality, not living forever, but becoming impossible to forget. There is a moment in the Epic of Gilgamesh, after the hero fails to gain eternal life, when he returns home, stands upon the walls of Uruk, and realizes something profound. He doesn't need to live forever. His city will. The walls will crumble, yes, but the story will remain. The knowledge, the effort, the art, they are the real immortality of humankind. That idea, born in Sumer, defines the human story itself. Every generation builds upon the last. Every ruin becomes a foundation. We do not escape death. We transcend it through creation. Even now, as modern archaeologists continue to unearth new Sumerian sites, each discovery reshapes our understanding of who we are. The more we learn about them, the more familiar they seem. They argued about taxes. They brewed beer. They wrote poetry about love and loss. They believed in destiny and feared the unknown. And they dreamed, oh, how they dreamed of building something that would last beyond their fragile lives. In the end, they succeeded. The Sumerians vanished, but civilization endured. The seed they planted grew into Babylon, into Greece, into Rome, into every modern city that hums with light and life. Their rivers may have dried, their language forgotten, but their legacy still flows, not through water, but through time. If you could stand in the ruins of your today, beneath the blazing Iraqi sun, you would see broken bricks and silence. But if you close your eyes, you can feel it, the heartbeat of humanity's beginning. Every whisper of wind carries the echo of prayers spoken 5,000 years ago. Every shadow between the ziggurat stones holds the memory of a civilization that dared to dream of eternity. They were the first to look at chaos and say, we can make this ordered. The first to look at the heavens and say, we can measure this. The first to look at clay and say, we can write our story. And they did. So, the next time you write your name, glance at a clock, or walk through a city, remember the land between two rivers. and the people who turned mud into meaning. Because everything began there. The Sumerians, the people who started civilization. The year was 1929. The world stood on the edge of a golden ager, so it seemed. Skyscrapers pierced the clouds over New York City. Jazz drifted through the night, and the stock market ticker never stopped its rapid dance of numbers. Ordinary people believed they were living in a new era of endless prosperity. But beneath the glittering surface, a storm was gathering, one that would break not only the banks of America, but the very spirit of the modern world. It began with optimism. In the 1920s, credit had become the magic word. You could buy a car, a house, even shares of stock without having the money up front. Farmers borrowed to buy tractors. Families borrowed to buy radios. Investors borrowed to buy more stocks, gambling on the belief that prices could only go up. It was a national dream built on borrowed air. Then, on a black Thursday in October, the air collapsed. The stock market crashed like a house of glass hit by a hammer. In hours, fortunes vanished. Men who had been millionaires by morning were broke by nightfall. Some walked out of Wall Street offices and never came back. In cities across America, ticker tape fluttered down like ashes after a fire. The newspapers called it panic. History would call it the Great Depression. But this was no ordinary economic slump. It was a chain reaction, a shock wave that raced across oceans and continents. In America, factories ground to a halt. In Germany, reparations payments dried up. In Britain, trade collapsed. In Japan, silk prices plummeted. Like dominoes, one nation after another fell into despair. In the United States, the illusion of prosperity shattered overnight. Farmers, who had already suffered through falling prices, now found themselves unable to sell at all. Wheat rotted in the fields, while families starved in the cities. Dust storms rolled over the Great Plains, turning day into night. People packed what little they owned into broken-down cars and drove west, searching for work that no longer existed. In the cities, bread lines stretched for blocks. Men in worn-out suits stood silently, waiting for soup ladled from government barrels. Children scavenged for coal along railroad tracks. Bank after bank closed its doors, locking away the life savings of millions. People lost not just their money, but their faith in the system. In 1932, when Franklin D. Roosevelt ran for president, he promised only one thing: hope. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, he said in his inaugural address. And people wanted to believe him. He launched the New Deal wave of public works, reforms, and safety nets. Bridges, dams, and roads rose from the despair built by hands that had been idle for years. For some, it felt like salvation. For others, it was too little, too late. Yet the Depression was never just an American tragedy. It was global. In Germany, still broken by the costs of World War I, the crash was catastrophic. American loans that had propped up the German economy vanished overnight. Factories closed, unemployment soared, and desperation took hold. In that chaos, radical voices began to rise, voices promising order, pride, and revenge. Out of that hunger and humiliation, Adolf Hitler's message began to find its audience. While Germany burned with anger, Britain faced its own reckoning. Once the heart of global trade, it now found its empire faltering. British exports collapsed by half. In the coal mines of Wales and the shipyards of Glasgow, thousands were thrown out of work. The unemployed marched through London carrying banners that read, "We want work, not charity." But there was little work to give. Across the Atlantic, in Latin America, the Depression struck like a drought. Countries that depended on exporting coffee, copper, and sugar suddenly had no buyers. In Brazil, coffee was so worthless that farmers burned it for fuel. In Chile, copper mines shut down, and in Argentina, ranchers slaughtered cattle they could no longer sell. Governments fell one after another, replaced by generals promising stability. In Asia, Japan's fragile economy teetered. Silk, the country's main export, lost almost all its value. Rural families who had once sent daughters to the city as factory workers now faced starvation. Out of desperation, Japan turned inward, then outward, toward militarization and empire. The invasion of Manchuria in 1931 was not just ambition, it was economic survival. Everywhere, old certainties crumbled. The gold standard, the backbone of the world's economy, collapsed as countries abandoned it one by one, choosing inflation over starvation. International trade, once the lifeblood of globalization, shrank by more than 2/3. Nations closed borders, raised tariffs, and blamed outsiders for their misery. But the Depression wasn't only about economics, it was psychological. It shook the very idea of progress. The generation that had survived the First World War now felt betrayed by peace. How could the same modern world that built airplanes and radios also bring such ruin? Artists, writers, and thinkers turned inward, searching for meaning in the wreckage. In America, John Steinbeck wrote The Grapes of Wrath, capturing the pain of displaced farmers crossing dust-choked highways. In Germany, the despair of the time gave rise to dark, expressionist films filled with shadows and fear. Jazz became mournful, poetry became protest. In every corner of the world, people began to question the old systems of capitalism and democracy. If free markets had failed so completely, maybe something new was needed. Communism gained followers. Fascism gained armies. Meanwhile, on the streets, ordinary people endured. They traded, bartered, improvised. Housewives turned flour sacks into dresses. Teenagers hopped freight trains in search of jobs, carrying all they owned in a knapsack. Children grew up too fast, learning to see hunger as normal. By 1933, the worst had come. Global industrial output had fallen by 1/3. World trade was half what it had been. In America alone, 13 million were unemployed. In Germany, nearly 6 million. In Britain, 3 million. The Depression had become universal. And yet, amid the suffering, there were flashes of resilience. Community soup kitchens, neighborhood credit groups, and small acts of kindness kept people alive. In Tennessee, men worked side by side building dams that would bring electricity to millions. In the Soviet Union, propaganda trumpeted the supposed success of planned economy while hiding its own disasters. Everywhere, governments learned that they could not stand apart from the economy, they had to shape it. But the longer the Depression lasted, the more it bred tension. Nations that once traded now competed for survival. Economic nationalism hardened into political hostility. When resources are scarce, people look for someone to blame. Politicians were ready to provide targets. In the United States, suspicion turned inward. Immigrants, communists, bankers, anyone different. In Germany, hatred turned outward toward Jews, communists, and foreign powers. In Japan, it became expansionist zeal. The Great Depression had not only emptied wallets, it had filled hearts with anger. Slowly, painfully, recovery began in the mid-1930s. America's New Deal put millions back to work. Britain devalued its currency and revived trade within its empire. Germany, under Hitler, launched vast programs of rearmament that masked unemployment. But even as economies healed, something darker was growing beneath the surface. The world had learned to rebuild, but it had also learned to fear. The faith in peace, in reason, in cooperation had been broken. The Depression had proved that collapse was possible anywhere, anytime, and that desperate nations would do desperate things. In 1929, the world had danced to jazz. By 1939, it marched to the drumbeat of war. The Great Depression did not merely end with recovery, it ended with fire. The shockwaves that began with falling stocks on Wall Street had rippled outward for a decade, shaking thrones, toppling democracies, and paving the road to the deadliest conflict in human history.